Today I am going to be talking to you about dinglehoppers. And while some of you might be confused as to why the name of my speech happens to be a made-up word, allow me to explain. Dinglehoppers is a word that the character Scuttle comes up with in the Disney movie The Little Mermaid. He uses this word to describe what we would call forks. Scuttle claims that humans use these babies to straighten hair out, and while most humans would disagree, some agree with Ambrose Bierce that a fork is only used for putting dead animals into the mouth. But I'm here to say there are more to these dinglehoppers than meets the eye. Forks are so common that most of us don't even think twice about using them. But I'm going to talk about their history, the different types of forks and their uses, and the implications that forks have in our lives. Well, most people know that forks are eating utensils with tines, the number ranging from 2 to 4. Most people don't know the history of forks. Suzanne van Drachenfels claims that forks were first used as pitchforks, and that the word fork comes from the Latin word furca, which means pitchfork. Forks were first used as eating utensils in around 400 AD in Constantinople. Stephanie Butler claims that forks were first seen in the Middle East around the 7th century, but they weren't introduced to the West until the Byzantine princess Theodora Anna Ducana married the Venetian Doge in 1075. Well, Venice wasn't a huge fan of the princess or of forks, and von Drachenfels even claims that the Pope announced that forks were an affront to God's intentions for fingers, and so they were banned. With the Pope's ban, forks were gone for about 300 years in the West. And around the 16th century, forks started to reappear. In England, they weren't very popular though, because they were considered a rather girly utensil, except for the exception of the sucket, which was used to keep fingers from being stained when eating foods with syrup that could stain the fingers. Butler claims that France had no mention of forks until Catherine de' Medici married Henry II in 1533. But the French weren't very big fans of the Italian practice of keeping their hands clean, so they decided to ditch the forks and continue to eat with their hands. For all of us that are thankful that we don't have to use our fingers and we are allowed to use forks, we can thank Charles I of England. In 1633, he claimed that it is decent to use a fork, which started the movement that we now know as modern table manners. While forks were widely accepted, they were not widely adopted. Von Drachenfels claims that it wasn't until the 19th century, thanks to mass production and electroplating, that let the middle class be able to afford these forks. So what now? Since you just learned the history of forks, let me tell you about the future of these forks. Megan Johnston gives us an example of a very futuristic fork on her website, goodfoods.com. This fork is called the Happy Fork. This fork is designed to help you eat more mindfully and more slowly. It does this using an electronic monitor that tracks the hand-to-mouth movement and starts to flash if it thinks you're eating too quickly. Too quickly meaning more than 75 movements in a 20-minute meal. This data is then uploaded to your smartphone via Bluetooth, where you can track your progress. Do you ever go to a restaurant and you're really confused as to why there are so many forks? If you're anything like me, you wonder, why can't we just use one fork for everything? Well, it turns out that different forks are used for different purposes. EtiquetteScholar.com claims that a normal flatware set has 5 forks. These forks are the dinner fork, the fish fork, the salad/dessert fork, the luncheon fork, and other seafood fork. In addition to these, there are 7 specialty forks. These forks are the lobster fork, the fruit fork, the ice cream fork, the pastry fork, the strawberry fork, the snail fork, and the oyster fork. Flatware is made in 2 styles, continental and American. But the American size, which is about ½ an inch shorter than the continental, is the most popular selling. So each fork is designed for a specific meal or food, and if you bear with me, I'm going to tell you about them. The dinner fork is what we would typically think of when someone says the word fork, is for informal and formal dining, and is used to eat the main course of the meal. The fish fork, which Etiquette Scholar claims is used to give leverage to remove the meat from the bone, The salad and dessert fork is broader and flatter than the dinner fork, with an extra wide left tine that is used to cut through the thick veins of vegetables and tougher desserts, such as baklava. The lunch fork, which is typically only found in older cutlery sets, is smaller and designed to fit a smaller lunch plate rather than a larger dinner plate. And the other seafood fork, which is different than the fish fork in that the seafood fork is meant to spear seafood that has already been peeled, such as shrimp, not remove the meat from the bones. Bear with me now as we move to some of the lesser known forks. The lobster fork, which is used to spear lobster in the shell, is used in informal dining. This fork has one long narrow tine that ends with two hooks, or one center tine with two hooks on either side. The fruit fork, which is narrower and slender than a normal dinner fork, is not as popular in America as it is in Europe because Americans tend to eat their fruit with their hands. The ice cream fork is literally a spork, and I'm not sure why we can't just use a spoon for that one. The pastry fork is slightly smaller than a dessert fork, but is only used in informal settings. A strawberry fork is made with three long, narrow tines and is used to dip strawberries into condiments, such as whipped cream. A snail fork is smaller, with two long, pointed tines that are used to spear meat in the shell used in informal settings. An oyster fork has three short and wide and curved tines. These tines are designed to follow the shape of the shell as to get the most meat possible. Well, so what? Why do we need to know about forks? Well, it turns out there are greater implications on our lives than we could possibly have imagined. B. Wilson claims that cutlery has changed our bodies over time as we have evolved to getting used to using it. If you ask an orthodontist what a normal teeth arrangement looks like, they're probably going to tell you it's an overbite. But this is a pretty recent development, recent meaning in the past 250 years. Before cutlery, humans had to clamp down on foods between their incisors, which as a result caused the incisors to be worn down. But when the process of cutting their food with a fork and a knife became popular, and this was done from an early age into late adulthood, the incisors were not worn down and continued to grow. As a result, the human bodies evolved, and eventually we have the overbite. Well, it turns out forks have not only changed our teeth, but they've changed our health. According to von Drachenfels, forks would get washed in between meals and sometimes even between servings, which the hands that used the forks definitely did not. Therefore, this caused less sickness as less germs were being transported from the hands to the food to the mouth. So I know you just listened to a speech about forks, but I hope you took something away from this. And whether that is an appreciation for the inventiveness of cutlery makers, or just an enjoyment that it's no longer a religious disgrace to use a fork. I also would like to clear up any confusion for the Little Mermaid fans out there, and that forks are not meant to be used for aesthetically pleasing configurations of hair that humans go nuts over. We're supposed to eat with them. Thank you. Now, if y'all have any questions, we have a 1 to 3 minute question time.
Now, do I move the camera to them? Oh.
So, in all those eras of before the fork and then the 300 years without the fork, and the Pope deemed that, was it just the hands? Did they use spoons?
They used, in ancient times, they used shells as like really early spoons, and they've had knives for almost as long as like cavemen have been around. But up until ancient Greece, like people used only really knives and then their hands. But it was considered like a great honor. Like if you had knives, you weren't expected to give them to your guests because like knives were so expensive and so ornate that if you went to a dinner party, you'd actually bring your own knives.
So what are some of the things that forks are made of currently? Or what are some of the different things forks have been made of throughout the years?
Well, originally when they started when they started to become accepted, they were really only used by the upper class and royalty. And it wasn't until like the 19th century that people started to be able to afford them, like regular people. So when they first started to become really accepted, they were made of gold and silver. And then when electroplating came around, they were silver plated.
Was the ice cream different, that it needed a spork?
I think it was described, it was really just a fancy spork because it was a spoon that had the fork tips on the end. It really just sounded like a spork to me. I'm not sure why they had to use it, a fork part.
Functional, just.
Well, it could perhaps be that, it was just a luxury of the wealthy, as you'd said that wealthy people were the ones that began to use forks. So it could be that was just another thing, another extravagant thing to have the spork for ice cream in case there was some ice cream was served on a little cake or something, who knows.
It was really interesting. Forks were actually part of people's dowries. Like that's how they were spread throughout like the world. That's how France first found a fork. It was in Catherine de Medici's dowry that like Henry II got gold forks as part of marrying his wife.
What's this?